Hey everybody. So this is our Jeopardy for the Attitudes chapter. And if you'll notice, the columns align with each of the chapter learning outcomes. So first column is attitude formation. Then we'll talk about how attitudes contribute to behaviors. Column 3 was a merging of a couple of learning outcomes. And then you'll see columns 4 and 5 conclude with the final learning objectives, ways to resist persuasion and cognitive dissonance. So let's do attitude formation for 100. If Billy tells his friend that he intends to vote for a certain candidate, then Billy's intention reflects A, what is, an attitude. Okay, so attitude formation for 200. Just to provide a little bit of context before we talk about this question, explicit attitudes are consciously accessible attitudes. They're controllable and reportable, whereas implicit attitudes are less controllable and potentially not consciously accessible. So one study employing the IAT, which is the implicit associations tests, suggests that a gender gap in wages may be linked to implicit attitudes. We would expect reaction times to be faster or slower for associations between men and wealth. What is faster? Okay, attitude formation for 300. A film studio pairs with a brewery and exclusively includes scenes of people drinking this beer or the beer standing in the background of scenes throughout many of its summer blockbusters. Sales of the brewery's line of beers skyrocket. The increased sales were likely due to what type of conditioning? What is subliminal conditioning? Okay, attitude formation for 400. A form of learning in which responses that lead to positive outcomes or which permit avoidance of negative outcomes are strengthened. What is instrumental conditioning? Attitude formation for 500. Having not met any members of a new social group, you hear a person expressing negative views of that group. Your attitude toward the new group would not be likely influenced by hearing this negative message if what? So is it you like this person expressing the view but believe his or her view to be unsubstantiated? Is it you do not expect to be meeting any members of the new social group in the near future? Is it the person expressing the attitude is someone you dislike and see as dissimilar to yourself? Or is it you see the person expressing the message as subtly similar to members of the new social group? The correct answer is C. The person expressing the attitude is someone you dislike and see as dissimilar to yourself. We hold values similar to and identify with members of our reference groups. Okay, so how attitudes influence behavior for 100. Simone feels somewhat ambivalent about premarital sex. However, most of her friends seem to be unambiguously in favor of sexual activity before marriage. As a result, in a recent group discussion in her health class, Simone expressed fairly strong opinions in favor of premarital sex and avoided voicing her real concerns about the topic. Simone's actions are most likely due to what is pluralistic ignorance. Pluralistic ignorance is the erroneous belief that others have attitudes different than ourselves. Teresa owns and operates a craft beer brewery in her hometown in New York, upstate New York. Recently, there's been a legislative proposal to increase the drinking age in New York from 21 to 23. Teresa is fervently opposed to this proposal. The strength of Teresa's opposition likely stems from what is a vested interest. So if this age changed from 21 to 23, that would take a hit in her financial endeavors. Okay, how attitudes influence behaviors for 300. Whistleblowers generally blow the whistle on corporate misbehavior because of what 3 attributes? What is their attitude is extreme, certain, and derives from personal experience. Okay, attitudes influence behavior for 400. What are the 2 components of attitude certainty? What is attitude clarity and attitude correctedness? Attitude clarity is being clear about what one's attitude is. Repeated expressions of attitudes make for greater clarity. Attitude correctedness is feeling one's attitude is the valid or proper one to hold. It's greater when others share our attitudes, which basically is associated with higher consensus. Okay, so we're going to go to attitudes influence behavior for 500, which exerts stronger effects on our behavior. Attitudes formed on the basis of direct or indirect experience with the object about which we hold a particular attitude. What is direct experience? Attitudes formed on the basis of direct experience are likely to be stronger and be more likely to come to mind in the presence of the attitude object. It also increases personal relevance. Okay, so this particular column is a combination of two learning objectives. How do attitudes guide behavior and how attitudes are changed? So for 100, the theory of planned behavior contends that our behavioral intentions are determined in part by what three factors? What is our attitudes toward the behavior, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control. Examples of this are our perceptions of whether the behavior will yield positive or negative consequences, our perceptions of whether others will approve or disapprove of the behavior, and our appraisals of our ability to perform the behavior. Okay, so for 200, attitudes can be automatically activated and influence behavior by shaping interpretation of the situation, which in turn dictates behavior. This perspective is known as the attitude to behavior process model. Okay, so this is going to be the next learning objective, which is how attitudes are changed. For 300, what communicator characteristics are most persuasive in changing attitudes? What is credibility or expertise? If the communicator argues against their self-interests, if they're attractive, if it's somebody who we know, for instance, electronic word of mouth, if there's no forewarning, and if the messages are positively framed. Okay, for 400, what two factors determine whether we engage in effortful or effortless processing of information? It is our capacity to process information and our motivational level. So the theories that illustrate these two distinct modes of thought are referred to as the elaboration likelihood model and the heuristic systematic model. You want to be able to differentiate between those two models. And the last item in this category for 500, what is the main factor which influences the strength of a message's persuasion? What is the degree of self-relevance? If it's more self-relevant, we're going to be more inclined to be persuaded. Okay, so we're going to go with resisting persuasion for 100. Bethany has been listening to a political speaker who is encouraging people to support a law that would require all people to recycle aluminum cans and severely penalize those who do not recycle. The speaker is giving strong arguments in favor of this proposed law and is couching his appeal in moral and ethical language. As a result, Bethany is becoming increasingly annoyed and resentful of the speaker and his arguments. She may be experiencing what is reactance. Reactance is when we experience negative reactions to threats to one's personal freedom. When doesn't forewarning prevent persuasion? What is when people are distracted? If we're not paying attention, we may not know somebody is going to try to persuade us. Marlon is a liberal. When he wants to watch the news on television, he only watches MSNBC. On the internet, he only views popular liberal sites such as The Nation, Salon, and Slate. When he's using Facebook, if any of his friends post links with conservative viewpoints, he hides these from his feed. Marlon is resisting persuasion through the use of what is selective avoidance. This is a tendency to direct attention away from information that challenges existing attitudes. Such avoidance increases resistance to persuasion. Resisting persuasion attempts for 400. What two factors make some people more resistant to persuasive efforts? What is engagement in conscious counter-arguing and bolstering one's initial attitude position? Okay, and the final item in this category for 500. Why does ego depletion occur? What is? Because it undermines our ability to engage in self-regulation. And the final category for the attitude chapter is cognitive dissonance for 100. Quentin is a devout religious follower. The holy books of the religion Quentin subscribes to strongly advocate helping the poor. However, Quentin believes that the poor simply need to work harder, and he refuses to offer them any assistance. Quentin's reaction to the poor is a form of what is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is an unpleasant state that occurs when we notice that our attitudes and our behavior are inconsistent. Cognitive dissonance for 200. Arlene was always averse to physical contact with pigs because she thought pigs were essentially dirty animals. Despite her concerns, she was induced to kiss a clean-looking pig on the snout for $2 while appearing on a television game show. As a result, Arlene has become a staunch advocate of pigs, and she soon plans to have one as a pet. The most probable explanation for this change in attitudes is the less leads to more effect. So in this case, smaller rewards lead to greater attitudinal change due to the less leads more to effect. Okay, cognitive dissonance for 300. Irene considers herself to be an environmentalist, and she wants to reduce her carbon footprint. One day, her husband comes home and says that he sold their electric lawn mower and used the money, plus some savings, to buy a new, powerful gasoline-powered mower. Irene is shocked, but when she uses the mower, she decides that she really likes it. This makes her feel uneasy, so she reminds herself of all the good environmental work she's done in the past. Irene is engaging in what is self-affirmation. Self-affirmation refers to the tendency to respond to a threat to one's self-concept by affirming one's competence in another area that's different from the threat. Okay, cognitive dissonance for 400. Patty is a politician running for public office. At a town hall meeting, she claims that she has always fought for and will continue to fight for the LGBTQ community. At this, a person who doesn't support Patty stands up and claims that Patty only began to support marriage equality after the majority of U.S. states had legalized same-sex marriage. This person is trying to generate feelings of what is hypocrisy. And finally, cognitive dissonance for 500. Cultures in which people are expected to conform to important social norms are referred to as what is tight cultures. You want to be able to give an example of such a culture and describe how this impacts some of the attitude processes described in this chapter. So, for example, the United States is a loose culture, and our personal attitudes are fairly good guides for behavior, whereas in India or Pakistan, which are more tight cultures, their personal attitudes are less strongly linked to behavior. And this concludes our discussion of attitudes.